year was 2050. The air was no longer free. It started as a whisper, an unthinkable rumor spreading through underground forums and hushed conversations in dimly lit back alleys. People laughed at first. Pay for air? Impossible. But then overnight, the impossible became reality. The first sign of change was subtle. Giant billboards displaying a sleek new logo. AirCredit Corp. Breathe smarter. A revolutionary program, they claimed. Clean, filtered air available for all. Just register for an account. At first, it was free. People signed up without a second thought, seduced by the promise of healthier lungs and pollution-free breathing. Then, the tears appeared. It started with premium subscriptions, better oxygen quality, exclusive discounts. Then came the restrictions, basic air allocations, fees for exceeding limits. Before anyone realized what had happened, oxygen had become a commodity. Those who could afford it lived in comfort, breathing purified air through elegant designer masks. The rest, they were left with government-sanctioned dispensers, gasping for whatever remnants trickled through the system. At first, people protested. Lawsuits were filed. Human rights activists screamed. But AirCredit had already sunk its claws too deep. It owned the politicians, controlled the regulators, and by the time the world understood the game, it was too late. Breathing had a price, and not everyone could afford to pay. Part 1. The Oxygen Debt System. Ethan Monroe never thought he'd be one of them. Once a middle-class software engineer, he had lost his job when AI automation replaced him. His savings dried up, and soon he found himself in the lowest oxygen tier, basic air allocation, which allowed only 8 hours of breathable air per day. Any extra cost money he no longer had. Ethan's oxygen meter beeped aggressively, flashing red. Balance, maintenance for 450 credits. He had gone into debt without realizing it. The AirCredit system worked like a predatory lender. Miss a payment and interest rates skyrocketed. Default entirely and your breathing privileges were revoked. His lungs tightened as the public oxygen dispensers refused to work. His air mask refused to activate. Panic surged through him. He needed to find air. Fast. He stumbled towards a nearby oxygen station, hoping to get at least a small ration of public air. A long line of people stretched from the dispenser, all of them gasping, eyes sunken with desperation. The government had promised that no one would be left without air, yet here they were, waiting hours just to get a single inhalation. A mother held her crying baby close to her chest, trying to shield him from the suffocating smog. An elderly man clutched his throat, his oxygen meter flickering dangerously close to zero. Hush! The public dispensers shut down. A robotic voice suddenly echoed through the station. Public oxygen reserves depleted. Please top up your AirCredit balance. A collective groan rippled through the crowd, quickly turning into shouts of rage and panic. Security enforcers arrived within minutes, clad in black armor with the glowing AirCredit insignia on their chests. They carried oxygen rifles, not to help, but to enforce compliance. Anyone who got too desperate, too violent, would find themselves incapacitated and gasping for breath. Ethan turned away, feeling the weight of hopelessness pressing down on him. There had to be another way. Part 2, the black market for air. Ethan stumbled through the dark alleyways of Sector 17, where rumors spoke of underground oxygen farms. He found a small, dimly lit warehouse where masked figures exchanged air canisters like drugs. A man in a tattered coat eyed him warily. "You looking for a hit of O2?" the man asked, holding out a battered metal tank. 50 credits for a minute. No freebies. Ethan clenched his fists. He had no credits. His vision blurred as oxygen deprivation set in. He felt his body slow down, his lungs tightening as if they were wrapped in an invisible fist. But then, a woman, tall, sharp-eyed, stepped forward. "I'll cover him," she said. "For now." She handed over the credits, and the man hooked Ethan up to a crude breathing mask. Pure, unsanctioned oxygen flooded his lungs, and for the first time in hours, he felt alive. The woman introduced herself as Kaya, a former scientist turned rebel. She led him to an underground resistance group, the Breathless. Their mission? To take down AirCredit Corp and restore free air to the people. Kaya explained how AirCredit had bought out politicians, controlled public utilities, and manipulated the market to keep people in perpetual debt. The system was designed to create suffocation slavery. Ethan, filled with rage, knew he couldn't just walk away. Part 3. The Resistance Awakens. Ethan spent weeks training with the Breathless, learning how to navigate the underbelly of the city without being detected. They weren't just a small group of radicals. There were thousands of people who had suffered under AirCredit's rule, ready to fight back. Together, they hacked into AirCredit's financial records, exposing corruption and leaked documents to the press. But the government, under corporate pressure, labeled them as terrorists. The city was flooded with propaganda. Air theft is a crime. Support our economy. Breathe responsibly. One night, Kaya and Ethan infiltrated a high-security oxygen reserve. The goal was simple: disable the central oxygen control grid for just one night, long enough to let the people feel what it was like to breathe freely. The mission was almost compromised when a drone spotted Ethan planting an override device. A siren blared. Enforcers stormed the facility, their oxygen rifles hissing. Kaya covered him. "Go!" she shouted, throwing him an emergency air tank. Ethan sprinted toward the main control room, his fingers shaking as he typed the final override command. The system crashed. Part 4. The Aftermath. For the first time in over a decade, oxygen was free. For one night, the people breathed without restriction. A revolution had begun. The government attempted to reassert control, deploying enforcers to restore the oxygen debts, but the damage was done. The world saw the truth. Protests erupted in every major city, and the stock value of AirCredit plummeted overnight. Ethan and Kaya became fugitives, heroes of the underground rebellion. Posters with their faces were plastered on every digital billboard. Shh, wanted for air crimes. Yet despite the danger, they pressed on. The battle for free air had only just begun. Would you survive in a world where you had to pay for every breath? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more dystopian horror stories.